Right now, somewhere in America, there are entire towns where no one lives, streets with no cars, schools with no children, hospitals with no patients, homes with furniture still inside, clothes still in closets, food still in pantries, as if everyone just got up and walked away and never came back. These are not horror movies. These are real places, real towns that once had families, businesses, dreams, laughter, and now they have nothing but silence, dust, and decay. And the scariest part, some of these towns died so recently that Google Maps still shows them as active. You can still find their restaurants on Yelp, still find their schools on Google Reviews, still find their churches on Facebook with events scheduled that will never happen. And in the next 1 hour, I am going to take you inside the 10 most haunting dead towns in America in 2026, towns that the government doesn't talk about, towns that the media ignores, and towns that hold secrets so dark that once you hear them, you will never look at America the same way again. Buckle up, because this journey is going to disturb you. Number 10. Centralia, Pennsylvania, the town that hell swallowed. We start our list with a town that has been burning for over 60 years, and I mean that literally. Centralia, Pennsylvania was once a thriving coal mining town, population 2,700 people, churches, schools, bars, shops, a real community, American dream, small town life, kids playing in the streets, neighbors waving at each other, Friday night football, Sunday morning church, the whole picture perfect thing. And then in 1962, someone made a decision that would destroy everything. The town had an old strip mine pit that was being used as a landfill, and someone decided to burn the trash in it. Simple, right? Burn the garbage, clean up the area, except there was one problem. Underneath that pit was a massive network of coal mines, miles and miles of coal veins running deep beneath the town, and when that fire hit the coal, it spread underground silently, invisibly, like a monster crawling beneath people's feet, and it never stopped. At first nobody noticed. A little smoke here, a little warmth there. The ground felt slightly warm in some spots. People thought it was nothing, but the fire was spreading every day, every week, every month. It was eating its way through the underground coal veins, moving beneath homes, beneath schools, beneath churches, beneath the entire town, and nobody could see it because it was all happening underground. Then things got terrifying. 1979, the owner of a gas station stuck a dipstick into his underground fuel tank to check the level. When he pulled it out, the dipstick was hot, not warm, hot. He measured the temperature of the gasoline in his underground tank. It was 172 degrees Fahrenheit. Gasoline at 172 degrees, one spark, and the entire gas station would have become a bomb. But the moment that made the world pay attention happened in 1981. A 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was walking in his grandmother's backyard when the ground suddenly opened beneath his feet. A sinkhole 4 feet wide, 150 feet deep opened up and swallowed him. He grabbed onto a tree root and held on while deadly carbon monoxide gas poured out of the hole. His cousin pulled him out. If he had fallen 2 seconds later, he would be dead. A 12-year-old boy almost swallowed by the earth in his own backyard because of a fire burning underground for 20 years. The government finally stepped in 1984. Congress allocated $42 million to relocate the residents of Centralia. Most people took the buyout and left, but here is the crazy part. Some people refused to leave, even with fire burning beneath their homes, even with toxic gases seeping through their floors, even with sinkholes opening randomly. They said, "This is our home, we are not leaving." And as of 2026, there are still 5 residents living in Centralia, 5 people living on top of an underground fire that scientists say could burn for another 250 years. Drive through Centralia today, and it is the most haunting thing you will ever see. Streets are still there, perfectly paved but cracked with steam rising from the fissures, fire hydrants standing on empty corner sidewalks leading to nothing, foundations of homes with nothing on top, just empty lots where families once lived. The church is gone, the school is gone, the shops are gone. Route 61, the main highway that used to run through town, had to be permanently closed because the road literally buckled. From the heat underneath, you can still walk on the old highway and see the cracks, see the steam rising, feel the heat beneath your feet. You are literally walking on top of hell. The zip code 17927 was revoked by the U.S. Postal Service. Centralia officially does not exist anymore on paper, but the fire still burns, the smoke still rises, and those 5 remaining residents still wake up every morning in a town that the earth is slowly consuming. This is not a metaphor, this is not a movie, this is real, and it is happening right now as you watch this video, the fire beneath Sioux. Now we go to a place that should have been one of the most important cities in America. Cairo, Illinois, pronounced Kyro, sits at the exact point where the Ohio River meets the Mississippi River, the 2 most important rivers in American history. This location was so strategic that Charles Dickens himself visited Cairo and predicted it would become one of the greatest cities in the Western world. Mark Twain wrote about Cairo in Huckleberry Finn, it was supposed to be the jewel of the Midwest, and for a while it was. In the 1920s, Cairo had a population of 15,000 people. It was booming. Steamboats docked at its ports. Cotton was traded on its streets. Businesses thrived. Hotels were full. Restaurants were packed. It was the place to be in southern Illinois, but beneath the surface something was rotting, and it was not the rivers, it was hate. Cairo became one of the most racially violent towns in American history. In 1967, a black soldier named Robert Hunt was found dead in the Cairo police station. The police said suicide, the black community said murder, and that was the spark that lit a fire worse than Centralia's. The town split. White citizens formed the White Hats, a vigilante group. Black citizens formed the United Front. Boycotts, protests, shootings, firebombings. The town was at war with itself for years. White business owners would rather close their stores than serve black customers. Black residents would rather drive 30 miles than shop at white-owned stores, and slowly, painfully, inevitably, both sides destroyed the town. Businesses closed one by one, families left one by one. The population dropped from 15,000 to 900 to 50,000 to 30,000 to 2,000, and today, in 2026, Cairo has fewer than 1,500 residents, and most of them are trapped there, too poor to leave, too old to start over. Walk through Cairo today and you will see something that looks like a war zone, and in many ways it was 3-story brick buildings that once housed thriving businesses now have trees growing through their windows, roofs, collapsed walls, crumbling entire blocks, abandoned. The public housing projects stand empty with shattered windows and graffiti. The high school is a shell, the downtown is a ghost, and the most haunting part is the architecture, because you can see how beautiful this town once was. Ornate buildings, grand facades, detailed brickwork. This was a town built with pride, built to last, built to be great, and now it is crumbling into dust. The Gem Theater, once the cultural heart of Cairo, where people dressed up on Saturday nights for movies and shows, now stands with its marquee rusted, its doors chained, its inside rotting. The Halliday Hotel, once the finest hotel in southern Illinois where celebrities and politicians stayed, now just a hollow shell with pigeons flying through what used to be the lobby. Cairo had everything: location, rivers, history, architecture, culture, and it threw it all away because of hate, because of racism, because of violence, because people chose to destroy each other rather than build together, and that is the saddest obituary any town can have. The Army Corps of Engineers has said that without constant maintenance of the levees, the rivers will eventually reclaim Cairo. The very rivers that were supposed to make it great will one day swallow it completely, and when that happens there will be nothing left: no buildings, no streets, no memories, just water covering the spot where a great American city almost existed. This next town did not die because of fire or hate, it died because of poison. Pitcher, Oklahoma was a lead and zinc mining town, one of the most productive mining areas in American history. The Tar Creek mining district produced so much lead and zinc that it was critical to both world wars. The metal from Pitcher's mines ended up in bullets and tanks and ships. This tiny Oklahoma town literally helped win 2 world wars, and how did America repay it? By letting it die. For decades, the mines operated with zero environmental regulations. Mining companies pulled millions of tons of or out of the ground and left behind mountains of waste called chat piles, massive hills of toxic mining waste that contained lead, cadmium, and other heavy metals. These chat piles were everywhere in Pitcher, some as tall as 200 feet. Kids used to play on them, ride their bikes, jump off them, swim in the ponds that formed around them. Nobody told them those ponds were filled with toxic water. Nobody told them that chat pile dust was giving them lead poisoning. In 1994, the EPA finally tested the children of Pitcher, and the results were devastating. 34% of children had lead levels in their blood that exceeded federal safety standards. 34%. 1 in 3 kids in Pitcher was being slowly poisoned by the ground they played on, the air they breathed, the water they drank. Lead poisoning in children causes brain damage, learning disabilities, behavioral problems. And it is irreversible. Those children were damaged permanently, and nobody had told their parents. But it got worse. The underground mines had been filling with water for years, and that water was mixing with the toxic minerals, creating acid mine drainage. This toxic water was seeping into Tar Creek, turning it orange, literally bright orange water flowing through town. The water table was contaminated, the ground was contaminated, the air was contaminated. Pitcher was sitting on top of a toxic nightmare, and people were still living there, still drinking the water, still breathing the air, still sending their kids to play on the chat piles. 2006, the Army Corps of Engineers dropped the final bomb. They studied the underground mines beneath Pitcher and concluded that the mines had created so many voids underground that the ground could collapse at any time with no warning. Your house, your street, your school could just fall into the earth without any notice. Sinkholes were already appearing, homes were cracking, roads were buckling. Pitcher was literally falling into its own graves. The mines that made it rich were now swallowing it whole. The government declared Pitcher a Superfund site and in 2009 offered buyouts to all residents. Most took the money and left. The schools closed, the post office closed, the businesses closed, and then, as if nature itself wanted to put the final nail in the coffin, an EF4 tornado hit Pitcher in 2008, killing 6 people and destroying what was left of the town. It was as if God himself said, "This town is done." Drive through Pitcher today and it is surreal. The chat piles are still there, mountains of gray toxic waste rising above empty fields where houses used to be, foundations visible, streets cracked and overgrown, the school building still standing but empty, the water tower still up with Pitcher painted on it, overlooking nothing. This was a town that gave everything to America, that helped win wars, that sacrificed its land, its water, its air, its children, and America just walked away, left the mess, left the poison, left the scars, and said, not our problem. Gary, Indiana. This one hurts because Gary is not some tiny forgotten town in the middle of nowhere. Gary was a major American city founded in 1906 by U.S. Steel Corporation. It was named after Elbert Gary, the chairman of U.S. Steel. This was a company town built from scratch specifically to produce steel, and for decades it did exactly that. Gary became one of the steel capitals of the world. By 1960, Gary had a population of 178,000 people. 178,000. It had shopping districts, theaters, restaurants, schools, hospitals, a thriving downtown. It was the birthplace of the Jackson 5. Michael Jackson grew up on Jackson Street in Gary. The most famous entertainer in human history came from this city. That is how significant Gary was. But then everything fell apart, and it fell apart fast. First, the steel industry declined, foreign competition, automation, reduced demand. U.S. Steel started laying off workers, thousands of jobs gone in a few years. Then white flight happened as the city's demographics changed. White families left for the suburbs, taking their money, their businesses, their tax dollars with them. Then crime exploded, drugs, gangs, violence, murder. Gary became one of the most dangerous cities in America. At one point, it had the highest murder rate in the entire country. And then the city just started dying. Population went from 178,000 to 150,000 to 100,000 to 80,000 to today fewer than 70,000 and dropping. That means Gary has lost over 60% of its population, more than 100,000 people just gone, and they left behind everything: houses, churches, schools, factories, all just abandoned. The Methodist Church on Broadway, one of the most beautiful churches you have ever seen. Gothic architecture, stained glass windows, soaring ceilings, now completely abandoned. The roof is caving in, trees are growing inside the church, through the pews, through the altar, through the place where people once got married, where babies were baptized, where families prayed together. Now it is a ruin. The Palace Theater, once a grand movie palace with ornate decorations and a massive marquee, now gutted, burned out, hollowed. The City Methodist Church, the Union Station, the Ambassador Apartments, building after building, block after block, neighborhood after neighborhood, all dead, all decaying, all returning to nature. And Gary is not in the middle of nowhere. Gary is 25 miles from Chicago. You can see the Chicago skyline from Gary. A world class city is right there, and yet Gary is dying. Nobody is saving it. Nobody is investing in it. Nobody cares. The Gary public school system has been in emergency state control. The murder rate remains among the highest in America. Entire neighborhoods have been demolished by the city because maintaining empty buildings was too expensive. They just knocked them down and left empty lots, block after block of just grass, where a city used to be, where 178,000 people used to live. Michael Jackson left Gary and became the king of pop, the biggest star the world has ever seen, and his hometown died. The house on Jackson Street where he grew up is still their small, modest house with a chain-link fence around it. Tourists still visit, they take photos, they leave, and they see the decay around it, the boarded-up houses, the empty lots, the broken streets, and they think, how did this happen? How does the birthplace of the greatest entertainer ever become this? And the answer is simple. America used Gary up, took its steel, took its labor, took its talent, took Michael Jackson, and then threw the city away like an empty can. Number 6. Fordlandia, Brazil, built by Henry Ford but dead as Detroit. Wait, this is not in America, I know, but this town was built by America, built by one of the most iconic American industrialists ever, Henry Ford, and its story is so insane, so arrogant, so perfectly American that it must be on this list. 1928, Henry Ford had a problem. He needed rubber for his car tires, and the rubber market was controlled by the British through their plantations in Southeast Asia. Ford hated depending on anyone for anything, so he came up with a plan that only a billionaire could. He would build his own rubber plantation, and he would build it in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil, and he would not just build a plantation, he would build an entire American town in the middle of the jungle, complete with American style houses, American hospitals, American schools, swimming pools, golf courses, and even hamburger restaurants in the Amazon. He bought a tract of land the size of Connecticut and named it Fordlandia, and this is where the disaster began, because Henry Ford knew everything about making cars, but he knew nothing about growing rubber, and he refused to listen to anyone who did. He planted the rubber trees too close together, which is perfect in a factory but terrible in a jungle because it allowed leaf blight to spread from tree to tree and destroy entire plantations. He refused to hire local botanists or tropical agriculture experts because he believed American know-how could solve anything. He banned alcohol in Fordlandia, which caused the Brazilian workers to revolt. He tried to force American square dancing on Brazilian workers who wanted samba. He mandated American Food in the cafeteria for workers who wanted rice, beans, and local cuisine. Everything about Fordlandia was Ford trying to impose America onto the Amazon, and the Amazon fought back. The workers rioted in 1930, they smashed the cafeteria, destroyed equipment, chased the managers into the jungle. The Brazilian army had to be called in to restore order. The rubber trees kept dying from blight insects and disease. The entire agricultural operation was a catastrophe. Ford poured millions into the project, refusing to admit failure because Henry Ford never admitted failure, but reality does not care about ego. In 1945, Henry Ford's grandson Henry Ford II finally pulled the plug, sold the entire operation back to the Brazilian government for a fraction of what was invested. Total loss estimated at $20 million in 1945 money, which is roughly $340 million in today's dollars, all of it gone. Visit Fordlandia today, and it is one of the most bizarre sights on earth. American-style houses with front porches and fire hydrants sitting in the middle of the Amazon jungle. The water tower still stands with the Ford logo rusted but visible. The hospital is empty. The school is empty. The factory is a shell. The swimming pool is filled with rainwater and frogs. American infrastructure slowly being consumed by the world's most powerful jungle vines crawling over rooftops, trees growing through factory floors. The Amazon is taking it all back. Fordlandia is a monument to arrogance, the belief that money and American willpower could conquer nature itself, and nature's response was simple, patient, and devastating. No, you cannot, and Fordlandia stands today as proof. Number 5. Pripyat, Ukraine. Actually, let me bring it back to America. Number 5. Times Beach, Missouri. The town erased by the government. This story is so disturbing that when I first researched it, I thought it was fiction, but it is 100% real, and it happened in Missouri, just outside St. Louis. Times Beach was a small resort community founded in 1925 along the Merrimack River. About 600 families lived there, working-class people, modest homes, tight-knit community, the kind of town where everybody knows your name, everybody watches out for each other's kids, the kind of town that politicians love to talk about in speeches but never actually help. And the roads in Times Beach were unpaved, dusty dirt roads that turned to mud when it rained, and in 1972 the city hired a waste oil hauler named Russell Bliss to spray oil on the roads to keep the dust down. Simple solution, cheap solution, spray oil, dust settles, done. Except Russell Bliss was not spraying regular oil, he was spraying waste oil that was contaminated with dioxin, one of the most toxic chemical compounds known to humanity. Dioxin causes cancer, birth defects, liver damage, immune system destruction, neurological damage. It is so toxic that a few parts per billion can be dangerous, and Russell Bliss was spraying it on the roads of Times Beach, where children played, where people walked, where families lived and breathed and existed every single day. Where did the dioxin come from? A chemical company called Napaco had hired Bliss to dispose of waste from their manufacturing of Agent Orange. Yes, that Agent Orange, the chemical weapon used in Vietnam, the defoliant that caused cancer and birth defects in hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese people and American soldiers. That poison was being sprayed on the roads of a small Missouri town, and nobody knew. The effects showed up quickly. Horses died first. Dozens of horses at stables where Bliss had sprayed the oil just dropped dead. Cats, dogs, birds all dying. Then children started getting sick, skin rashes, nosebleeds, headaches, nausea, but nobody connected it to the roads. Nobody thought the dust they were breathing, the ground their kids played on, could be slowly killing them. It was not until 1982, 10 years after the spraying, that the EPA finally tested Times Beach. The results were horrifying. Dioxin levels were 100 to 300 times higher than levels considered safe for human exposure. 100 to 300 times. The entire town was a toxic waste site, and people had been living, breathing, eating, sleeping on top of it for a decade. Then nature delivered the knockout punch. December 1982, the Merrimack River flooded. Times Beach was underwater, and the flood spread the dioxin everywhere, mixed it into the soil, the water, the mud, carried it into homes, into basements, into everything. The combination of dioxin contamination and flood damage was so severe that the EPA made an unprecedented decision. They would buy the entire town, every single property, every single home, every single business, and they would demolish everything, and they would erase Times Beach from the map. 1985, the buyout was complete. Every resident relocated, every building demolished, every street torn up. Times Beach was literally wiped off the face of the earth. The site was turned into a state park, Route 66 State Park, and if you go there today, you would never know a town existed there. You would never know 600 families lived there. You would never know children played on roads sprayed with one of the most toxic substances ever created. You would see trees, grass, trails, birds, as if nothing ever happened, as if 600 families never existed. The government erased Times Beach so completely that it is the closest thing to a town being deleted from reality that you will ever find. No buildings remain, no foundations, no markers, no memorial, just nature reclaiming a place where America's chemical industry poisoned an entire community and then pretended it never happened. Number 4. Bodie, California. Frozen in time since 1882. Now we go to the Wild West, and I mean the real Wild West, not the Hollywood version. Bodie, California, sitting at 8,400 feet elevation in the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains. This was once one of the baddest towns in America, and I mean that in every sense of the word. 1876 gold was discovered at Bodie, and within 3 years the population exploded from 20 to 10,000 people. 10,000 people living at 8,400 feet in one of the harshest climates in America. Temperatures dropping to -40 in winter. Winds so strong they would knock you off your feet. Snow so deep it would bury buildings, and yet 10,000 people came because gold makes people do crazy things. Bodie had 65 saloons, 65 in a town of 10,000 people. That is one saloon for every 150 people. It had multiple brothels, gambling halls, opium dens, and a reputation for violence that was legendary. A local newspaper once wrote that Bodie was a sea of sin lashed by the tempests of lust and passion. There was a murder almost every day, robberies every night, bar fights every hour. Bodie was so dangerous that when a little girl was told her family was moving to Bodie, she wrote in her diary, "Goodbye God. I am going to Bodie." The town had no law in any real sense. The 1 or 2 lawmen were either corrupt or constantly overwhelmed. Justice was handled by the citizens themselves, which usually meant a rope and a tree. Vigilante justice was the only justice in Bodie, and yet the town thrived because the gold kept flowing. Money poured in, businesses boomed. The Standard Mine was producing millions in gold, or Bodie was one of the richest towns per capita in America. And then the gold ran out. By 1882, the mines were producing less and less. People started leaving slowly at first, then faster. A trickle became a flood, became a stampede for the exits. 10,000 became 5,000, became 1,000, became 100, became almost zero. And here is what makes Bodie special. The people who left did not pack up carefully. They did not sell their belongings. They just walked away, left everything behind: dishes on tables, clothes in closets, tools in workshops, bottles in saloons, as if they all just stood up one morning and vanished. Today Bodie is the best preserved ghost town in America. It is a California State Historic Park maintained in a state of what they call arrested decay, which means they do not restore anything, they do not rebuild anything, they just prevent it from falling down completely, and the result is haunting. You can walk through Bodie and look through the windows of buildings that have not been touched in over 140 years. You can see the pool table in the saloon with balls still on it. You can see shelves in the general store with products still on them. You can see a child's toy on the floor of a bedroom. You can see a coffin in the undertaker's workshop half finished, as if he was in the middle of making it and just walked away. You can see the schoolhouse with desks still in rows, the church with pews still in place, the jail with bars still on the windows. There is a curse associated with Bodie. They say that if you take anything from the town, even a nail, even a small rock, you will be cursed with terrible luck, and the park rangers have files full of letters from people who took something, mailing it back with letters apologizing, describing all the bad luck they had: car accidents, divorces, job losses, illnesses, all after taking something from Bodie. Coincidence maybe, but the rangers get these letters every week. Bodie sits there in the high desert, frozen in 1882, wind howling through empty buildings, dust coating everything. The ghosts of 10,000 people who came for gold found chaos and then vanished. It is one of the most powerful places in America, a perfect time capsule of what happens when a town lives fast, dies young, and leaves a beautiful corpse. Number 3. Detroit, Michigan. The biggest dead town in America. I know Detroit is not technically a dead town. It still has 620,000 residents, but listen, Detroit has lost 1.2 million people since its peak. 1.2 million, that is more people than the entire population of cities like San Francisco or Seattle or Denver. Imagine the entire population of San Francisco just leaving, disappearing, gone. That is what happened to Detroit, and what they left behind is the largest urban ruin in the developed world. Detroit was once the richest city in America, not one of the richest in the 1950s. Detroit had the highest median income of any major city in the United States, higher than New York, higher than Los Angeles, higher than Chicago. Detroit was number 1, and it was all because of one thing: cars. Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, the big three, all headquartered in Detroit. The auto industry made Detroit a powerhouse. Good jobs, union wages, middle-class prosperity, beautiful homes, beautiful neighborhoods, beautiful life. The American dream was not just lived in Detroit, it was manufactured there, literally. And then the dominoes started falling. 1967, the 12th Street riot, one of the most destructive civil disturbances in American history. 5 days of violence, 43 dead, 1189 injured, 2,000 buildings destroyed. The National Guard and the 82nd Airborne were deployed, Army paratroopers on the streets of an American city, tanks rolling down Woodward Avenue. This was not a foreign war, this was Detroit, and after the riot, the white population fled. White flight was not unique to Detroit, but the scale was unprecedented. Hundreds of thousands of white families moved to the suburbs, taking their money, their businesses, their tax dollars. Detroit's tax base collapsed, and with it the city's ability to provide basic services, police, fire, schools, infrastructure. Everything started to crumble. Then the auto industry left, GM closed plants, Ford moved operations, Chrysler downsized, the jobs that had built Detroit vanished and nothing replaced them. The population fell from 1.85 million in 1950 to under 640,000 today, and the physical evidence of that collapse is everywhere. The Michigan Central Station, once the grandest train station in America, 18 stories tall, Beaux-Arts architecture, a cathedral of transportation where thousands of travelers passed through every day, closed in 1988 and stood empty for 30 years, becoming the single most iconic symbol of urban decay in America. Its broken windows, its crumbling facade, its empty halls were photographed by artists from around the world. It became more famous as a ruin than it ever was as a functioning station. Ford Motor Company finally bought it in 2018 and is restoring it, but for 30 years it stood as a monument to failure. The Packard Automotive Plant, 3.5 million square feet of factory space where luxury Packard cars were once built, closed in 1958 and has been decaying ever since. It is one of the largest abandoned structures in the world, and it sits right there in Detroit. Graffiti-covered, tree-infested, crumbling, collapsing, 3.5 million square feet of death. Entire neighborhoods in Detroit are gone, not declining, not struggling, gone as in every house demolished, every building removed, just empty fields with scattered trees and maybe a fire hydrant or a sidewalk leading to nothing. The city has demolished over 20,000 structures since 2014, 20,000 buildings just knocked down because nobody lives there, nobody wants them, and maintaining them is impossible. But here is what makes Detroit the saddest entry on this list. Detroit is not dead, it is dying. There is a difference. Centralia burned, pitcher was poisoned, Times Beach was erased, but Detroit is slowly, painfully bleeding out while 620,000 people still live there, still go to work, still send their kids to school, still try to make a life in a city that America abandoned, and that is more tragic than any ghost town because in Detroit, the ghosts are still alive. Number 2. Cahaba, Alabama, the capital that vanished. This one will shock you because most Americans have never even heard of Cahaba, and that is exactly the point. Cahaba was the first state capital of Alabama from 1820 to 1826, not a small town, not a settlement, the state capital, the seat of government, the center of power, the place where laws were made, where the governor lived, where the future of Alabama was decided, and today there is nothing there. Cahaba sits at the confluence of the Alabama River and the Cahaba River, and that location, which seemed perfect for a capital, turned out to be its death sentence because the rivers flooded constantly. Every few years the entire town would be underwater. The Capitol building flooded, the governor's mansion flooded, the streets became rivers, the homes became swimming pools, and in 1826 the state government said enough and moved the capital to Tuscaloosa. But Cahaba did not die immediately. It reinvented itself as a center of the cotton trade. During the antebellum period, wealthy plantation owners built grand mansions, slaves worked the cotton fields. Cahaba became a prosperous southern town with all the beauty and all the horror that entailed. Beautiful architecture built on the backs of enslaved people, elegant balls attended by people who owned human beings. This was the antebellum South in all its complexity and contradiction. Then came the Civil War, and Cahaba played a role that most history books ignore. It became a prison for captured Union soldiers. Castle Morgan, a makeshift prison camp, held thousands of Union POWs in terrible conditions. Disease, starvation, overcrowding. The suffering that happened at Cahaba during the war is one of those chapters of American history that gets conveniently forgotten. After the war, Cahaba was done. The railroads bypassed it. The rivers kept flooding. The former slaves left. The plantation economy collapsed, and one by one the residents packed up and moved. Many of them literally disassembled their houses brick by brick, board by board, and moved them to the new town of Selma, 15 miles away. They did not just leave their homes, they took their homes with them, leaving nothing behind but foundations and ghosts. Visit Cahaba today, and it is one of the most eerie experiences in America. You are standing in what was once a state capital, a center of power, and there is nothing there, nothing but trees and fields and the faint outlines of streets that no longer exist. You can see brick columns standing alone in the woods, holding up nothing. Former doorways to former buildings of a former capital, of a former way of life. There are artesian wells that still flow, water bubbling up from underground as if the earth itself is crying for what was lost. The most haunting spot is the old cemetery where the grave markers are scattered among the trees, some broken, some sunken into the earth, some barely readable names and dates of people who once lived in the capital of their state, who thought they were building something permanent, something that would last, and now their graves are barely visible in a forest that has swallowed everything they built. Cahaba is a reminder that nothing in America is permanent, not cities, not capitals, not power, not prosperity. The most important place in Alabama in 1820 is now a place most Alabamians have never visited, never even known about. An entire capital city just vanished and nobody really noticed. Number 1. Krakow, Basilicata. No, that is Italy. Number 1. The Salton Riviera, California. America's dead paradise. This is number 1, and I saved it for last because this town story is the most disturbing, the most ironic, and the most relevant to America in 2026 because this is not a town that died 100 years ago. This town died slowly in front of everyone's eyes and nobody did anything. The Salton Sea was created by accident in 1905 when irrigation canals from the Colorado River broke and water flooded into the Salton Sink in the California desert. For 2 years, water poured into this basin, creating a massive inland sea in the middle of the desert, and someone looked at this accidental lake and said, you know what, this could be the next Palm Springs. In the 1950s and 1960s, developers built resort communities along the shores of the Salton Sea, the Salton Riviera, Bombay Beach, Desert Shores, Salton City. These were marketed as paradise, affordable waterfront living in sunny California. Come build your dream home on the shores of California's largest lake, boating, fishing, swimming, year-round sunshine. Celebrities visited Frank Sinatra, the Beach Boys, the Marx Brothers. It was glamorous, it was exciting, it was the California dream at a discount price, and thousands of people bought in. Homes were built, yacht clubs opened, marinas were constructed, hotels went up, restaurants, bars, shops, the whole thing, everything a resort town needs, and for about 20 years it was wonderful. Families on boats, kids swimming, sunsets over the water, barbecues on the beach. This was real, this was people's lives, their homes, their memories, their happiness. And then the Salton Sea started to die. The sea has no outlet, water flows in but does not flow out. The only way water leaves is through evaporation, and when water evaporates it leaves behind everything that was dissolved in it: salt, minerals, agricultural runoff, pesticides, fertilizers, and every year the water got saltier and saltier and saltier until it became saltier than the ocean. The fish started dying, millions of tilapia floating belly up on the surface, washing up on the shores, piling up in walls of dead fish. The smell was indescribable. Imagine millions of rotting fish in 120-degree desert heat. The stench carried for miles. Then the birds started dying, hundreds of thousands of birds, pelicans, grebes, cormorants, dying from botulism, from the toxic water, from eating the poisoned fish, massive die-offs that turned the shores into carpets of dead birds, feathers, bones, decay. The water level started dropping as less agricultural runoff entered the sea. The shores receded, exposing the lake bed, which was covered in dead fish bones, salt, and toxic dust. When the wind blew, and in the desert the wind always blows, this toxic dust became airborne, carrying pesticides, heavy metals, and fine particles into the lungs of everyone living nearby. The communities around the Salton Sea became some of the poorest in California. Imperial County has childhood asthma rates among the highest in the state. The air quality is dangerous, the water is toxic, the smell is unbearable, and the property values collapsed. Homes that sold for $100,000 in the 1960s were worth nothing. Nobody would buy them, nobody would live there, nobody wanted anything to do with the Salton Sea. Visit the Salton Riviera today in 2026, and it is like walking through a nightmare. Resort homes sit abandoned, their windows broken, their walls covered in salt deposits and graffiti. The marina is dry, the boats sit on dirt. Where water used to be, the yacht club is a ruin, its sign, still visible, promoting a lifestyle that no longer exists. Dead fish bones cover the shore mixed with salt, creating a white, crusty landscape that looks like another planet. The old swimming pools are filled with sand and debris. Palm trees stand dead and dry against a sky that should be beautiful but smells like death. Bombay Beach, population now roughly 250 people living in trailers and rundown structures, has become an ironic art destination. Artists have installed sculptures and art installations among the ruins, creating a surreal landscape where art and decay coexist. There is a drive-in movie screen standing in the desert with no projector, no cars, no audience, just a screen facing nothing, a swing set on the shore where children used to play, now overlooking a receding toxic lake, an old telephone booth. Standing alone in the salt flats, who would you call? The Salton Riviera is my number 1 because it is a mirror. It reflects everything wrong with how America treats places and people. It was built on a lie, an accidental lake marketed as permanent paradise. It was exploited by developers who made their money and left. It was abandoned by the government when fixing it became too expensive. It was forgotten by a society that only cares about places when they are profitable, and now the people who remain, the ones too poor to leave, too old to move, too attached to their memories. They breathe toxic air, drink questionable water, and live in a place that California pretends does not exist. And the cruelest irony of all, the Salton Sea is shrinking, and as it shrinks it exposes more toxic lakebed, which creates more toxic dust, which makes more people sick, which makes more people leave, which reduces the political pressure to fix it, which means it keeps shrinking. It is a death spiral, a feedback loop of decay and neglect and indifference. This is not ancient history, this is happening now in 2026 in California, the richest state in the richest country on earth, and nobody is doing a damn thing about it. The final truth. So there they are, 10 towns, 10 stories, 10 different ways that the American dream can die, and if you have been watching for this long, I want to leave you with something real. These towns are not just places on a map, they are warnings, every single one of them. Centralia warns us about ignoring problems until they are unstoppable. Cairo warns us about what hate does to a community. Pitcher warns us about sacrificing people for profit. Gary warns us about what happens when an economy leaves and nobody builds a new one. Times Beach warns us about the poisons we ignore. Bodie warns us about building everything on one resource. Detroit warns us about abandoning the people who built our wealth. Cahaba warns us about the impermanence of power. Fordlandia warns us about the arrogance of thinking money conquers everything, and the Sultan Riviera warns us about what happens when we build on lies. And the scariest part, there are towns in America right now in 2026 that are on this same path. Towns where the factory just closed, towns where the mine just shut down, towns where the young people just left, towns where the water just got contaminated, towns where the infrastructure just crumbled, and in 20 years someone will make a documentary about them and people will watch and say, how did we let that happen? The same way you just watched this and said the same thing about these 10 towns. If you are still here after 1 hour, you are not just a viewer, you are someone who cares, and that matters, because the only thing that kills a town faster than a fire or a poison or a flood is indifference, and the fact that you watch this means you are not indifferent. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe, because I am covering more abandoned places, more forgotten stories, more truths that America does not want you to know. And comment below which town haunted you the most, because I read every single comment and your voice matters even if these towns no longer have one. This has been the top 10 dead towns of 2026, and I hope to God this list does not get longer, but I know it will.